today we understand that working in tech, exciting, front row seat to the future, at the same time, easily suck us into a 24/7 lifestyle. Those of us who think like owner, have that big equity share, we want to go that extra mile. I'm imagining in the late 80s, early 90s with your parents, what was it like back then for people working in tech?
It was hard. They just kind of happened into studying computer science. That's how they ended up in tech. And they moved my mom out at her job. She worked at Xerox in the 80s. They moved her out to Palo Alto from Texas. Both of my parents spent so much time working. It was because they really felt like, okay, we need to set our family up for success. We don't have very much money. We moved here from a different country. We can't go home because they moved from Iran and they could never go back because of the revolution that happened there. Working in an industry like tech, where we didn't have to know English that well and where they actually are giving a lot of money, that's going to be huge. And so that's why they were so committed to working so hard. And it was really a big part of our life.
How did they come to understand the value of not just getting these high salaries, but also the equity that went with it?
My dad worked at startups. One of those startups got acquired by Cisco. In the late 90s, Cisco popped off. And that was really like the thing I think that pushed them out of just being like, lower middle class into like upper middle class, right? That was kind of what really changed their life, that being at the right place at the right time at the right company, It wasn't like they were always like these, smart investors, but I think from that point, they said, okay, we really need to make this a priority and we really want to understand the financial markets.
I see that a lot in technology employees where they go to work for the high salary, they get the equity. It's interesting, but then when the people who have that event where all of a sudden it radically increases in value and they see themselves starting to move up economically, that is then the moment where they say, we need to think about this differently. For yourself, how did the conversations change around that? Was that something that was focused on, we're building this, we want to teach you what this is and understand how you can do it too?
Definitely as I got older. I think when I was much younger, there was a lot of money stress in our life. Right. And so I think my mom was the one who really stepped up and said, I got to figure this out and I need to learn how to make this work for the family. She worked at Apple in the 90s. I think Steve Jobs had just come back at that point and she was in the same room as him. Then she moved to Adobe and she was there for 15 years. I think she kind of saw the writing on the wall. So then she said, let me take a step back and figure out how to make these things work. And I know as I got older and I became a teenager, those conversations were a lot more prevalent where she was like kind of sitting me down and being like, really, once you start working, you really want to start thinking about these things. And I was always like, what? Like, Mom, I'm thinking about college. Like, I'm not thinking about work. So that was always funny. But I grew up watching like CNBC, the money markets.
Yes.
I was always like, I remember very vividly actually one morning where I was sitting there in their room watching the TV with CNBC on and I said, why do stocks go up? And I don't think they could really explain it to me. Like, there's really not a good explanation for what moves the market, to be honest.
I do want to take a step back and think about 80s, 90s. What was your dad's experience like in tech versus your mom's?
I think my dad was extremely stressed out working in tech, more than my mom was. He always remained an individual contributor. He was like working all the time. It felt like morning to night. He was just constantly on call as an engineer. So he'd have his moments where he kind of couldn't sleep. And my mom was in management. So they had two different career paths as well.
Obviously challenging, hard from a home environment. You're learning about the money that is changing things. What about the exciting parts of it? I mean, there was obviously successes that happened along the way. There was exciting innovation that was happening during that time.
I think my mom is a huge fan of technology and is a futurist. She just loves technology. I grew up very much using technology and she was always the first one to get the iPhone, the iPod, like all of these things. The consumer technology was so exciting for us because she worked in consumer technology. Even with Adobe, like we grew up using these softwares, right? I feel so lucky. Like that was so amazing for me to be able to just be in that world. And as soon as things were coming out, it was like, oh yeah, this is now how we live. We use these things. They have such a connected home still. Like everything is so high tech that I'm like, this is too much. Even when Alexa came out, it's like, I do not want Alexa listening to me, to be honest. But But she was there. My dad too. He really loved technology. Like, they were just so amazed with how they were kind of like in the front row of making a lot of this stuff happen. And granted, he was more on the back end kind of hardware side of things, so it wasn't like we were always experiencing the work that he was putting in, but it was still innovating for the industries that he was a part of, and that was pretty cool to see too. And they really felt like they were making an important impact, and they really were.